Alright, so you've probably been there before. You're chatting with someone, maybe a friend, maybe someone you've just met, and suddenly you start wondering, wait, is this person flirting with me, or are they just being nice? It's a question that's driven countless people crazy, and today we're diving deep into the psychology of it all. And let me tell you, once we break it down, you're going to see social interactions in a whole new light. But stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to read those subtle cues, and you might even realize something surprising about the people around you. Let's get into it. So, what makes this topic so tricky? Well, human behavior is complex. We all know that. But the line between friendliness and flirting is especially ambiguous because it taps into some of our deepest psychological drives: connection, attraction, and social belonging. Our brains are wired to pick up on social cues, but sometimes those cues can be misleading. In fact, plenty of psychological studies have shown that people often misinterpret others' intentions, either reading too much into a friendly gesture or missing a flirtatious one entirely. Let's start by addressing the first question: why do we struggle to tell the difference between flirting and friendliness? This is where some fascinating psychological experiments come in. One of the most famous, conducted by social psychologist Dr. Nicholas Guiguin, explored how subtle behaviors can change our perceptions. In one of his studies, Guiguin found that something as simple as light physical contact, like a brief touch on the arm, made participants more likely to perceive someone as flirting with them. And this wasn't just about attraction. Even when the person doing the touching wasn't traditionally attractive, the perception of flirtation increased. This shows us how sensitive we are to physical cues, even when we don't consciously realize it. Click subscribe to this channel to get more insights into human psychology. But here's where it gets even more interesting. In a separate experiment, participants were asked to observe interactions between two people and then judge whether they thought the interaction was flirtatious or just friendly. What the researchers found was fascinating. People consistently overestimated the level of flirtation when they observed the interaction compared to when they were directly involved in it. So, you might be better at spotting someone else's flirting than recognizing it when it's happening to you. This is a key insight into human psychology. Our perspective shifts when we're personally involved, often clouding our judgment. Now, let's talk about the halo effect, a well-documented psychological phenomenon that can make things even more confusing. The halo effect occurs when we perceive someone as attractive or charismatic, and that positive impression spills over into how we interpret everything they do. If someone you find attractive smiles at you, compliments you, or even just gives you a little extra attention, your brain might automatically label those behaviors as flirtatious, even if they're just being polite. This cognitive bias can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings because we're not necessarily seeing the behavior for what it is. We're seeing it through the lens of our own attraction or admiration. But let's flip the script for a second. What if you are the one giving off mixed signals? Maybe you're naturally a friendly, outgoing person, but people keep assuming you're flirting with them. What's happening here? Well, social psychologists have found that some people have what we call a high flirtatiousness baseline, meaning they naturally exhibit behaviors that others interpret as flirtatious, even when that's not their intention at all. This could include things like sustained eye contact, smiling frequently, or engaging in playful banter. These behaviors are often seen as signals of romantic interest, but for some people, they're just part of their regular social repertoire. In fact, one study by evolutionary psychologist Dr. Monica Moore found that people who are more expressive with their body language, what she called non-verbal immediacy behaviors, are often perceived as more flirtatious, even when they're just being friendly. This includes things like leaning in during a conversation, nodding along while someone else speaks, or using gestures to emphasize your words. So, if you're someone who tends to be physically expressive, others might interpret your enthusiasm as flirtation, even though you're just being your warm, friendly self. Now, what about the opposite scenario? Maybe you're worried that someone is being nice to you, but you're not sure if it's crossing into flirtatious territory. How do you know if they're just being friendly or if there's something more going on? Here's where the psychology of reciprocal behavior comes into play. Research shows that people who are interested in someone romantically will often mirror their behavior. This means that if you're noticing that the other person is subtly matching your energy, like mirroring your posture, gestures, or even your speech patterns, it could be a sign that they're flirting, not just being nice. This is called behavioral synchrony, and it's one of the more subtle cues that can indicate attraction. But remember, context is everything. Someone might be mirroring your behavior unconsciously, not because they're attracted to you, but because humans are naturally inclined to synchronize with others in social settings. It's part of how we build rapport and establish connections. So how can you tell if it's friendly rapport building or something more? Well, researchers suggest that intentionality is a key factor. If the person seems to be making an effort to spend more time with you, give you special attention, or escalate their physical touch, like moving from a casual touch on the arm to more prolonged contact, then it's more likely to be flirtation. But here's the kicker: even when someone is giving off clear signals, we often second-guess ourselves. Why? Because of a psychological phenomenon known as the fear of rejection. Research shows that people are often hesitant to interpret someone's behavior as flirting because they don't want to risk embarrassment or rejection if they're wrong. This fear can cloud our judgment, making us more likely to downplay flirtatious signals as mere friendliness. In fact, studies have found that people tend to err on the side of caution, especially in ambiguous situations, because the social cost of misinterpreting friendliness as flirtation is perceived to be higher than the cost of missing a potential romantic opportunity. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you thought someone was flirting with you, only to realize later that they were just being nice? Or maybe the opposite, you thought they were just being polite, but it turned out they were interested in you all along. It's a common experience, and it highlights just how tricky it can be to read these social cues. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about one more psychological concept that's crucial to understanding the difference between flirting and friendliness: social scripts. Social scripts are the unwritten rules that guide our behavior in different situations. When it comes to flirting, most cultures have specific social scripts that people are expected to follow. For example, in many Western cultures, overt compliments about someone's appearance, playful teasing, or prolonged eye contact are often seen as signs of flirting. But here's the thing: not everyone follows these scripts in the same way. Some people might be more subtle, while others might be more direct. And cultural differences can play a huge role in how we interpret these behaviors. What might be considered friendly in one culture could be seen as flirtatious in another. So, how do you navigate this complexity? How do you know if someone is flirting with you or just being nice, especially when social norms and personal styles vary so much? This is where pattern recognition comes in. Instead of focusing on one or two isolated behaviors, pay attention to patterns over time. If someone consistently behaves in a way that suggests they're interested, like seeking out opportunities to be alone with you, complimenting you frequently, or finding excuses to touch you, then it's more likely that they're flirting. But if their behavior is sporadic or inconsistent, it might just be friendliness. All right, I've given you a lot to think about so far, but we're just getting started. Now that we've laid the groundwork by understanding some of the key psychological concepts like the halo effect, behavioral synchrony, and social scripts, let's explore some more subtle but powerful psychological dynamics that can help you distinguish between flirting and friendliness. One of the most interesting factors we haven't touched on yet is the role of motivation. What drives someone to flirt versus just being nice? To understand this, we need to dig into evolutionary psychology. Researchers like Dr. David Buss have spent decades studying how our evolutionary past shapes modern human behavior, especially in the context of mate selection and attraction. From an evolutionary standpoint, flirting is often a way for individuals to signal romantic or sexual interest with the goal of forming a relationship or increasing reproductive opportunities. But friendliness, that's more about social cohesion. Being nice helps us form alliances, build trust, and strengthen social bonds within a community. So the motivations behind flirting and friendliness are fundamentally different, even if the behaviors sometimes overlap. In fact, one study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that men and women often engage in what researchers call strategic ambiguity in their social interactions. Essentially, people will sometimes act in a way that could be interpreted as either flirting or friendliness, depending on how the other person reacts. Why? Because it allows them to test the waters without fully committing to one interpretation. If the other person responds positively, they can escalate the flirtation. If the response is neutral or negative, they can backtrack and claim they were just being nice. This is a subtle but fascinating strategy that many people use, often without even realizing it. But here's where things get tricky for the person on the receiving end of this ambiguous behavior. Confirmation bias, another well-known psychological phenomenon, can play a big role. Confirmation bias is when we tend to interpret new information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs or desires. So, if you want someone to be flirting with you, you might be more likely to interpret their ambiguous behavior as flirtation, even if it's not. Conversely, if you're worried about misreading the situation, you might convince yourself that they're just being nice, despite clear signs of interest. This is why it's so easy to get caught in a loop of overthinking interactions. Now, let's talk about nonverbal communication, which plays a huge role in both flirting and friendliness. Studies in psychology show that as much as 70 to 90% of communication is nonverbal. This includes body language, eye contact, gestures, and even tone of voice. So, if you're trying to figure out whether someone is flirting or just being nice, it's crucial to pay attention to these nonverbal cues. For example, eye contact is one of the most telling signs. Research has shown that prolonged eye contact is often associated with attraction. In fact, a famous experiment by social psychologists Zick Rubin and Letitia Peplau found that couples who were romantically involved spent significantly more time gazing into each other's eyes compared to friends or acquaintances. If someone is holding eye contact with you just a little bit longer than usual, or if they're looking at you when they think you're not noticing, that could be a sign they're flirting. But be careful here, eye contact can also vary based on cultural norms, personality, and social context. Someone who is naturally shy may avoid eye contact altogether, even if they're interested in you, while someone who is very confident may use eye contact liberally, even when they're just being friendly. Body orientation is another key nonverbal cue. People who are flirting will often face you directly, with their body open towards you, meaning their arms aren't crossed and their feet or torso are pointed in your direction. This is a classic sign of engagement and interest. On the other hand, someone who is just being friendly might adopt a more casual posture, or they might not be as physically attuned to you. They could be more focused on the environment around them or on the conversation itself rather than on you as a person. Another subtle sign to watch for is haptics or physical touch. As I mentioned earlier, even light, casual touches can be interpreted as flirtatious, but the context and frequency of touch matter a lot. If someone touches your arm once during a conversation, that could be friendliness. But if they do it repeatedly, or if the touch lingers just a second too long, it's more likely to be flirtation. Dr. Guiguen's research on physical touch also found that the location of the touch is important. Touches on the hands or shoulders are often seen as more intimate than touches on the back or arm. Let's also discuss vocal tone and speech patterns. People who are flirting often adopt a slightly different tone of voice. They might speak more softly or use a more playful, teasing tone. There's even research showing that when people are attracted to someone, they unconsciously lower their pitch for men or raise their pitch for women to make their voice sound more appealing. Additionally, they may start to match your speech patterns, a phenomenon known as speech convergence. This is another form of behavioral synchrony, where people in conversation start to mimic each other's speech rhythms, tone, or even vocabulary. If someone seems to be using similar words or phrases as you, or if they're adjusting their tone to match yours, that could be a subtle sign of attraction. But let's not overlook the elephant in the room. Flirting styles vary dramatically from person to person. Psychologist Jeffrey Hall identified 5 distinct flirting styles in his research, and understanding these can help you make sense of different behaviors. The physical flirt: this person uses a lot of body language and touch to show their interest. They might stand closer to you, lean in, or find excuses to make physical contact. The traditional flirt: this style is more conservative. They might wait for you to make the first move, and their signals might be more subtle, like giving you extra attention or asking personal questions. The polite flirt: this person might seem shy or reserved. They won't be overt in their flirtation, but they'll show interest through deep conversation, listening attentively, or offering help. The sincere flirt: they focus on emotional connection and are likely to engage in meaningful conversations. They might ask about your feelings, your dreams, or other personal topics. The playful flirt: for them, flirting is fun and light-hearted. They might tease, joke, or use sarcasm to keep the interaction lively. Understanding these different styles can help you better analyze someone's behavior. For example, if someone is more of a polite flirt, they might not use a lot of physical touch or overt signals, but they'll show interest by being especially considerate or engaging you in deeper discussions. But let's not forget, there's also the issue of mixed signals. This can happen when someone's behavior seems flirtatious in one moment, but then shifts to something more neutral or even distant. Why does this happen? Well, sometimes people are unsure about their own feelings, or they might be testing your interest before fully committing to a flirtatious interaction. Other times, they might be influenced by external factors like social pressure, fear of rejection, or even a pre-existing relationship. One experiment by Dr. Arthur Aaron explored how emotional arousal can influence attraction. He paired up strangers and had them participate in a series of increasingly intimate conversations, culminating in 4 minutes of uninterrupted eye contact. The result: Many of the pairs reported feeling a deep sense of connection, and some even felt romantically attracted to each other despite having just met. This suggests that emotional intensity, whether it's caused by vulnerability, excitement, or even nervousness, can create feelings of attraction even when they weren't initially present. So, if someone is sending you mixed signals, it could be because their emotional state is fluctuating. They might feel attracted to you in one moment, but then pull back due to fear or uncertainty. Or they might be genuinely unsure about how they feel, and their behavior reflects that internal conflict. Now that we've covered a lot of ground, let me ask you this: have you ever received mixed signals from someone and wondered what it meant? It's one of the most confusing aspects of human interaction, and it's something we all experience at some point. Now that we've explored a lot of the internal dynamics of flirting versus friendliness, like different flirting styles, non-verbal cues, and the role of motivation, let's shift to some practical strategies and psychological insights you can apply in real-world situations. We'll also touch on how to navigate those tricky moments when you suspect someone might be interested but aren't sure how to respond. One of the key tools psychologists often recommend in reading social interactions is something called contextual awareness. This simply means that you can't always rely on individual behaviors in isolation. Instead, you need to consider the broader context in which those behaviors occur. For example, someone might be friendly and touch your arm when they're in a crowded, upbeat social setting, like at a party or a bar, where physical closeness is more common. But if they're touching your arm in a quieter, more intimate setting, like during a one-on-one conversation in a cafe, it could be more indicative of flirtation. The same behavior can mean different things based on the environment, and understanding this is crucial for accurately reading the situation. There's a psychological experiment that really drives this home. In a study conducted by Dr. April Blesky-Rechek, participants were asked to interpret behaviors in two different scenarios, one where they were being observed in a group setting and another where they were in a private one-on-one interaction. The results showed that people were much more likely to interpret behaviors as flirtatious in the one-on-one setting, even when the actions were identical. This suggests that the intimacy of the environment plays a huge role in how we perceive someone's intentions. So, if you're trying to figure out whether someone is flirting with you or just being nice, take a moment to step back and assess the broader context. Are you in a casual, public setting where friendliness is expected? Or are you in a more private, intimate space where flirtation might be more likely? That leads us to another important factor: the role of timing. Timing can reveal a lot about whether someone's actions are friendly or flirtatious. For example, if someone reaches out to you at odd hours, like late at night, or they text you something personal or thoughtful after a long day, that can be a sign that they're interested in more than just friendship. Psychologists call this relationship priming, where certain behaviors are more likely to indicate romantic interest because they happen at times when people are more emotionally vulnerable or reflective. And speaking of texting, let's dive into digital communication, which is a whole other layer of complexity. In today's world, much of our flirting happens over text, social media, or messaging apps. But how can you tell if someone is flirting or just being nice online when you can't rely on body language or tone of voice? Here's where you need to focus on consistency and escalation. Research in the field of communication psychology has shown that when people are interested in someone romantically, they tend to communicate more frequently and with more enthusiasm. If someone is consistently reaching out to you, replying quickly, or initiating conversations, that's often a sign that they're interested in something more than just a friendly chat. But it's not just about the frequency of communication, it's also about escalation. Are they gradually moving from casual conversation topics to more personal or intimate ones? Are they asking about your feelings, your experiences, or your future plans? This kind of emotional escalation is a strong indicator of flirtation, as it shows that the person is trying to build a deeper connection with you. One interesting psychological insight here comes from a study on emotional disclosure. Researchers found that people who disclose more personal or emotionally charged information are more likely to be seen as interested in forming a closer relationship. So, if someone is opening up to you about their personal life, their struggles, or their dreams, it's a good sign that they see you as more than just a casual acquaintance. But here's the key: it has to be mutual. If they're sharing personal details but not inviting you to do the same, it could still be a friendly gesture. But if they're actively encouraging you to open up as well, that's a stronger signal of flirtation. Let's not forget about social media behavior, which can also provide some clues. If someone is consistently liking, commenting on, or sharing your posts, it could just be a sign that they enjoy your content or are being supportive. But if they're going out of their way to interact with your older posts, like liking photos from weeks or even months ago, that can be a subtle form of digital flirting. It's a way of signaling interest without being too direct. Some people might do this as a way to test the waters and see how you respond. If you find that someone is engaging with your content frequently and in a way that seems more personal or attentive than usual, it's worth considering whether they might be trying to communicate their interest in a low-pressure way. Now, let's talk about how to respond when you think someone might be flirting with you, but you're not sure. One of the best strategies is something called reciprocal flirting. This is where you subtly mirror the other person's behaviors to test their reaction. If they're flirting with you using playful teasing, light physical touch, or sustained eye contact, you can respond in kind to see if they escalate the interaction. For example, if they make a joke with a flirtatious undertone, you can respond with a similar joke to keep the playful tone going. If they lean in during a conversation, you can subtly lean in as well. This creates a feedback loop where both of you are gradually increasing the level of flirtation without anyone having to make an overt declaration of interest. Psychological experiments have shown that mirroring behaviors, whether it's in body language, tone of voice, or conversational style, are often interpreted as a sign of attraction. This technique allows you to gauge the other person's interest without putting yourself in a vulnerable position. If they respond positively to your mirroring, it's a good indication that they're interested. If they don't, or if they pull back, then it's a sign that they might just be being friendly. But what if you're still uncertain? This is where direct questioning can come into play. While it might feel awkward, sometimes the best way to clarify someone's intentions is to ask them directly, but in a low-pressure way. You don't have to come out and say, "Are you flirting with me?" Instead, you can ask questions that give them a chance to clarify their feelings without putting them on the spot. For example, you could say something like, "I'm curious, do you see us as just friends, or do you think there's something more here?" This type of question is non-threatening and gives the other person space to either affirm their interest or clarify that they're just being friendly. In fact, some psychologists recommend using open-ended questions as a way to encourage more honest and thoughtful responses. Open-ended questions give the other person a chance to explain their feelings in more detail, rather than forcing them into a yes or no answer. This can lead to deeper conversations and a better understanding of where you both stand. But let's take a moment to acknowledge a key psychological principle: ambiguity tolerance. Some people are naturally more comfortable with ambiguity than others. If you're someone who struggles with uncertainty, not knowing whether someone is flirting or just being nice can be particularly stressful. But here's the thing: relationships often involve a degree of ambiguity, especially in the early stages. Learning to tolerate this ambiguity, rather than rushing to label the interaction, can actually help you enjoy the process of getting to know someone without the pressure of needing immediate answers. In fact, psychologist Dr. Barry Schwartz has written extensively about how the modern tendency to seek certainty in all aspects of life can actually reduce our ability to experience happiness and connection. Sometimes, allowing things to unfold naturally without forcing a clear definition can lead to stronger, more authentic relationships. That said, there's also the risk of overanalysis, which is something a lot of people fall into when trying to decipher someone's behavior. You might find yourself replaying conversations in your head, dissecting every word or gesture, trying to figure out if they were flirting or just being nice. This is where cognitive reframing can be incredibly helpful. Cognitive reframing is a psychological technique where you actively change the way you interpret a situation. Instead of focusing on the ambiguity and uncertainty, try reframing the situation in a more positive light. For example, instead of thinking, "I don't know if they're flirting, and it's driving me crazy," you could reframe it to, "I'm enjoying getting to know this person, and I'll learn more about their feelings over time." This shift in perspective can reduce anxiety and help you stay present in the moment. So, let's recap some of the key takeaways. Pay attention to the context and timing of the interaction. Where and when behaviors happen can give you important clues about whether someone is flirting or just being friendly. Look for patterns in behavior rather than focusing on isolated actions. Consistent attention, personal questions, and emotional escalation are stronger indicators of flirtation. Use reciprocal flirting to subtly test the waters. Mirroring someone's behavior can help you gauge whether they're interested in something more without putting yourself in a vulnerable position. Don't be afraid to use open-ended questions to clarify the other person's intentions if you're unsure. Finally, practice ambiguity tolerance. Recognize that not every interaction needs an immediate label, and allow relationships to develop naturally over time. I hope this has given you a deeper understanding of the psychology behind flirting and friendliness. It's a complex, fascinating topic, and I'm glad we could explore it together. Whether you're trying to figure out someone else's intentions or simply becoming more aware of your own behaviors, remember that human interactions are always a mix of subtlety, context, and personal interpretation. Thanks for sticking with me through this journey. Now go out there and start paying attention to those cues. You might be surprised at what you start noticing.